I want to thank everyone for the donations to Jerry's GoFundMe campaign. I also want to thank everyone who has shared the link on social media. We're up to $580 of the $1,500 goal, and Jerry and I thank everyone involved. I'm including the link in the description for this video as well. Number 1. The Old Man. My name is Katherine, and I'm telling this story just because I think it's a bit weird, even if it only looks really bad and may not have actually been what it seems. I have a fenced-in backyard, and to the left, there is a house visible from the back. Its backyard isn't very big, maybe about 15 feet of yard from ours to his house. An old man and his wife lived there back when I was around 14, and he didn't seem odd to me or my family until I was 18. For a time estimate, I'm 24 now. The man seemed like he used to be a farmer. He would always be wearing white old t-shirts and jeans with suspenders. But the thing that made it seem that way the most was how he would always be doing some kind of work in the backyard. Building stuff like the damn chicken coop that I hated, because that small rooster would crow at 3 in the morning and until 5. I found it odd that he'd have a chicken coop in a backyard so small, but nothing we could do about it. He would get a lot of dogs, but after a while we wouldn't see them anymore. One night, my brother and sister and I went outside when it was dark. We just wanted to get on the trampoline and play around. We had a flashlight. We saw his latest dog in his yard. He hadn't had a dog in a while, and this one looked like a Jack Russell Terrier. She had huge ears, her head was black, and her body was white. The cutest, sweetest thing in the world. Well, we saw her in the yard, but then the old man came out. We thought he wanted to get the dog. He sure scared me when I first noticed his silhouette. The only thing was, he stood there for a while too long. He was facing us, but we couldn't see his face. The dog eventually went in the house, but he looked at us for a while longer, about a minute or two. Once he left, we all laughed a bit and joked, now calling him the creepy old man. Often, when the dog was in his yard and we were out, we would go up to the gate and slip our hands through to pet her. She would come running to our hands, flipping on her back and licking us. One day, we came outside and we saw a "Beware of Dogs" sign on the fence facing our yard. We got mad since we know it's ridiculous, but we also noticed he has one sign facing out on each side of its fence, towards all his neighbors, and one on the front of his house, along with a "No Trespassing" sign. So now he's one of those people. Anyone who has that many signs is totally hiding something. Now we started making up scary things he might be hiding in his house. Like dead bodies, of course. Well, we keep playing with the dog anyway. It's too cute not to. But in a week, he starts building another fence around his yard. It's literally 2 inches from our fence, but his is a wire fence with tiny holes in it. It seems like there's no good reason for him to do this, only that our hands can't fit through the holes of this new gate. Knowing that he, for some reason, hates us playing with his dog, we do it anyway. Only slipping our fingers through. After all, we would only pet her for about a minute or so. We weren't doing anything wrong. When we were playing in our backyard, we would notice that he would leave his back door open a lot. We thought it was so that the dog could go in and out, so we thought nothing of it. All you could see in his house was a wall with a painting hanging on it. The glass shining never let us see what was on the painting. We didn't see much of his wife. We heard she was sick or something. Only seen her come out sometimes to hang clothes on the clothesline. One day, while we were out playing and paying no mind to his open back door, that is, until I climbed up on our swing set just for the hell of it, and when I looked over at his house, I could see better into it. and I noticed something a bit unnerving. The painting wasn't actually glass glaring over a picture, it was a large mirror. Even creepier was that I could now see a reflection of what was in front of the mirror, and it was a chair on the opposite wall facing the mirror. One of those comfortable club chairs with cushioned armrests and everything. If he would sit in that chair, he could watch us play in the reflection of the mirror, and perhaps that's why he would leave his door open. We told our parents about that, but they were just curious and thought it was odd too. Not really any proof that it's really what he was doing. About a month later, we went outside and saw a sign nailed into his yard. He wrote something on it, but we couldn't read it. We got our video camera and zoomed in to see what it said, and we read, R.I.P. Missy. We never saw his dog again. My dad said he heard the old man talking to our neighbor, telling her someone murdered his dog. That just made him seem more creepy. We were really pissed off that he could let that happen to his dog, and it honestly sounded like bullshit. He went through a lot by putting up fences and not letting his dog out for long, so I'm still kind of suspicious as to what actually happened to her. He kept getting dogs that went missing, but no graves for them. Eventually, he moved in 2014. We were all honestly grateful about that. I apologize if this story didn't actually have an ending like we saw a dead body in his house, or anything exciting like that, but it's still something you can wonder about. Reserve 7. My friends and I, all around the ages of 12 and 13, would play and hang out in an area of the housing project that once had been used as a dumping site, but was now abandoned, with hillocks and an old disposal that people would leave their garbage at, but it was no longer in use. The area was called Reserve 7, and one of us would sit upon the highest mound and watch for cars coming around the bend. One day, a car was spotted, and we all ran around the hillock and waited for the car to pass, but only this time, the car pulled into the site, and a man got out of the car. We watched him from above in silence as he went around to the trunk and took a shovel and began to dig. He dug a hole about a foot wide and a half-foot deep. This probably didn't take much time, but to me it seemed like hours. When he was finished, he put the shovel back into the trunk and drove off without putting anything into the hole. We found that odd, but it was almost time for supper, so we headed home. A couple of days later, we all agreed to meet again at the site to see if anything had been put into it. Sure enough, the hole had been covered in dirt, and we got sticks and began digging it up. Suddenly, we spotted what looked like a tiny hand. We poked at it with the sticks, and it was hard plastic inside a clear plastic bag. We continued to hit the dirt away with our sticks, and finally got a good look at what was inside. It was a doll. Why would anyone bury a doll? My 12-year-old mind thought there must have been something wrong with it. Perhaps it harbored an evil spirit, like the kind I remembered seeing on the Twilight Zone. We all agreed the best thing to do would be to rebury it, and never speak of it again. That was the end of summer, and our last visit to Reserve 7. My adult mind looks back on this incident and thinks perhaps there was something more nefarious going on. Perhaps this man was performing a test, a dry run, for your future burial, but only next time with a human. I'm 20 now, but I was between 12 and 14 when this happened. I had recently moved to the Washington countryside from Los Angeles, and I was really depressed about it. I was born in LA and had lived there until I was almost 12. Even though I always dreamed of living rurally, I never wanted to leave behind everything I had ever known. I was diagnosed with both NLD and generalized anxiety disorder when I was 10. NLD is a disorder that is closely related to Asperger's and is technically part of the autism spectrum. This causes me to have a very hard time adjusting to any sort of change, no matter how big or small it may be. So this move was the biggest change I had ever experienced, and my mind was full of unpleasant and painful thoughts. When you couple this with the fact that the trailer we were forced to move into was old and rather creepy, you could be sure that I was not doing well. But now on to the actual event. I'm certain that a lot of my feelings were due to constantly being anxious and upset. But even if this particular incident wasn't paranormal, there were other instances in that trailer that undoubtedly didn't have a natural cause. I might talk about those later if anyone is interested. Anyway, one night I was in bed, feeling pretty okay in spite of everything. I had to go to the bathroom. So I got up to head through the kitchen and dining room, which were located in the same space, and down the short yet particularly dark hallway. This hallway was definitely the main source of any jitters we had, but I was getting used to it. I made it to the bathroom, which was between my parents' room and my little brother's room, and did my business. As I opened the door and stepped out, I was positive that I saw my dad standing there, waiting to go in after I was finished. I smiled and said, "Oh, hi, Dad," in the nicest way I can. But he just stood there, not saying a word. The smile left my face, and a feeling of dread washed over me as I started to realize that maybe this man isn't my father. Indeed, the figure intimidates me more and more the longer I look at it, and I bolt around it, getting back to my room as fast as I can. I immediately close the door and climb back into bed, trying to reassure myself that everything is fine, but the feeling of dread didn't go away. Instead, it grows at a rather fast pace as I imagine the figure coming down the hallway and entering my room. And finally, I reach the point where I can't hold back my fear any longer, and I run back down the hallway in a panic, wanting nothing more than to be with my parents. I enter their bedroom, blubbering that I saw someone in the hallway. My mom tried to comfort me as my dad got out of bed, pulled out one of his guns, and made a thorough search of the entire trailer. He checked every nook and cranny of the place, including my bedroom. He returned a little while later and gave the all clear. I feel a bit better after that, and they tell me that I probably mistook the reflections from the television to be a figure. Whatever it was, I'm glad it ended well. I will never forget how genuinely scared it made me, though. Haunted Child's Room. I am a young girl who has lived in many houses, and most have had weird things happen. This certain house I lived at when I was 9, and in fact, I still live in it. Well, one night, I got dropped off at my mom's house. I was happy because I just got a new Play-Doh toy and wanted to use it. I went to my room, opened the toy up after greeting my cat, and started to play with the Princess Play-Doh toy. After a while, it was time for dinner, so I put up the toys. I got out and sat on my bed and played The Sims on my PS3 while I ate. I had both my door and the window closed, but it was really cold and I felt like I was being watched. Along with that board I had, my Play-Doh kept on moving, like it was being shook. It was behind my toy box and the board was about 7 feet tall. I was a tiny bit freaked out, but brushed it off pretty easily until I saw my little Cinderella Play-Doh doll just floating there. After a moment, it got thrown at my head. It hit my forehead and left a little bruise. My glass cats then got shoved off a table it was on and shattered into tiny shards. I ran to my mom and told her about it. She looked concerned, then cleaned up the glass. It was soon time to sleep, so I put on a movie and went to sleep. At 2 a.m., I was awoken to a strange noise. It was deep and very chilling. I ran to my mom's room and laid with her and fell asleep again. After a while in the morning, more things broke, many things important to me, and I kept seeing these little children about 7 years old. This is all I can really remember, and it really freaked me out at the time. Last October, my sisters and I decided to go for a pizza on a Friday night. Our dinner went well. We discussed about my sister's upcoming wedding. We made plans on what we'll be doing during the wedding, what kind of clothes we'll wear, the typical stuff associated with weddings. After our dinner, we headed home. We stopped at a red light. Our windows were rolled down, and I thought, let it be down. What can happen? We're in the city, and there are lights everywhere. But then I remembered something I've read in books. Never ever sit in the car with your windows rolled down and doors unlocked when at a stop sign, especially at night, because you never know who might try to get in or attack you through the open window. I immediately rolled my window up, locked the door, and told my sisters to do the same. Not even 5 seconds had passed after we rolled up our windows when a drunken man stumbled out of nowhere and started trying to unlock the back door of the car. He was banging on the window and trying to unlock the door at the same time. We went still. You cannot imagine the fear we felt at that moment. We couldn't jump the red light either because of the traffic camera. The man was now shouting profanities at us and banging on the roof, asking us to open the door. He came towards my side, and I felt as though my heart would jump out of my chest at that moment. He was trying to open my side door, and he was banging on my window, telling me to open the door for him. We didn't look at him. We were looking straight ahead, and thank goodness he decided to leave after a few minutes of him torturing us like that. When he slunk back into the hedges, my sisters and I breathed a sigh of relief. The light had also turned green at that moment. We sped out of there with our hearts still beating so fast. We now always roll our windows up and lock the doors whenever we are at a stoplight. You just don't know what can happen out there. So, creepy drunken guy, let's not meet. The bridge in the Boonies. This incident occurred in the Boonies, surrounding the suburb of a major city in northwest Ohio, where I originally hail and where I was raised. I am a 28-year-old male, now living downstate, and I frequently read the subreddit. I figured it was my turn to share an experience. I was 17 years old, and in high school when the incident occurred. To this day, I regularly reflect on the terror my friend and I experienced, as well as the lessons I learned about trusting your instinct and knowing when to remove yourself from a potentially dangerous situation. As mentioned, I am from a suburb where agricultural fields, boonies, which are small patches of forest spread among farmlands, and new housing developments branch out west and north from the city center. At this point in my life, I had few responsibilities aside from high school and a part-time job. I spent much of my free time hanging out with my friends, most frequently my friend Vince. He and I shared interests, had mutual friends, and lived relatively close to one another. We also shared a fascination for the weird, bizarre, unexplained, etc. Vince and I were past driving age, so we'd regularly go on country cruises to other friends' houses, to metro parks, or to concerts downtown. One weekend night, we were hanging out at Vince's house, enjoying the warm summer night in his backyard. While discussing creepy history and true crime, the local legend of a particular bridge out in the country near our town entered our conversation. To provide context about the legend, it allegedly takes place on a small bridge located about 10 miles out in the country west of our city. This small country road and the bridge, located on the road, carry a local legend which local teenagers pass from generation to generation. The legend describes an accident which occurred on the bridge decades ago. According to the legend, 2 teens were playing chicken on this country road and bridge, which ended in tragedy after both parties were killed and/or were thrown from their vehicle into the surrounding boony. Also, according to the legend, anyone who parks on this bridge in the middle of the night, turning off their lights and engine, will encounter the spirits of those involved in the tragedy. There are also claims of shadowy figures emerging from underneath the bridge in the middle of the night as one approaches the bridge. Your standard local legend. So, with nothing else better to do, Vince and I decided it would be a great idea to go investigate this bridge and legend. Leaving for the location from Vince's house in the neighborhood of 11:45 p.m., we grabbed my video camera, a small amount of gear, and hopped into Vince's 4-door Saturn sedan to begin our trip. Along the way to the road where the bridge is located, we stopped off to pick up some snacks and pondered the potential outcomes from our investigation. Although we enjoyed the weird and bizarre, we were skeptics and joked about how it would ultimately be uneventful. Nonetheless, neither of us had been to this location, and we were nervously excited to challenge our wits. To get to this location from our city, one must take a main city road north, which eventually turns into a country road, with open fields for miles on both sides. Eventually, you intersect at another main country road. This intersection is more recently developed, with surrounding housing developments and businesses. From this intersection, one heads west on the other main country road, in order to reach the intersection where the bridge is located. As you move further west, the housing developments and businesses begin to melt away. You drive for a good 10 minutes of open country, with open fields and boonies as far as the eye can see. This transition from city to complete openness in the middle of the night, with absolutely no streetlights to line the country roads, only added to our nervous excitement. Eventually along the way, you encounter an old oak tree on the right side of the road. This oak tree is the only tree within hundreds of feet in each direction, eerily marking the intersection and beginning of the small road on which the bridge is located. That old oak tree and small road on which the bridge is located is to the right from the main country road, and dead ends into the main country road on which we were driving west. As we'd never been to this location, and we were immersed in the thick blanket of darkness surrounding us, we slowly turned onto the small road, flipped the high beams, and began approaching the small bridge. The small country road on which the bridge is located has open fields on both sides. A boony cuts through the fields on both sides for the entire length of the bridge, so the area of the road encompassing the bridge is covered with tall trees and brush, and a smaller stream running underneath the bridge. As soon as you reach the end of the bridge, the road again opens into fields on both sides of the road. Think of it like a bottleneck, where only the length of the bridge, plus a few feet before or past, are covered and surrounded by boony forest. As we approached the small bridge, Vince's high beams funneled through the boony bottleneck and illuminated the length of the bridge. The entire bridge was covered in sloppy graffiti, blended with tire skid marks. Slightly to the left, hanging about 15 feet in the air from a tree branch, was a dummy with a wig, presumably placed by other teenagers to frighten those approaching the bridge. In order to survey the bridge and surrounding area on foot, we drove the length of the bridge and past the edge of the boony bottleneck, opening to fields on both sides of the small road. We parked about 50 feet away from the bridge, on the right-hand road shoulder, where a runoff ditch meets the open field. At this point, our senses were heightened, and we began observing the area directly around us. We nervously laughed and talked up the location's eeriness before walking back towards the bridge area. After a half hour of acclimating ourselves to the area and adjusting our eyesight to almost pitch darkness, We quickly became weary after noticing a car slowly approach the road entrance, where the small road dead ends into the main country road, the same intersection where we turned in order to reach the bridge. We watched and waited, hoping the car would continue along the main road. However, to our chagrin, the car turned onto the small road where the bridge is located. Vince and I hid from view at the edge of the Boonie bottleneck, past the bridge, in order to evaluate the driver's intention. Soon after, the car passed us and parked on the left-hand shoulder, roughly parallel to where we parked Vince's car. A couple minutes later, a few teenagers emerged from their car, preparing flashlights. Vince and I were relieved, recognizing that the others were there for the same reason. After introducing ourselves to the other group and discussing our intentions, only to investigate the area, Vince and I decided to go check out the underside of the roughly 60-foot length bridge. The other group went about doing their own investigation atop the bridge and laughed to one another, carrying on about the legend. Meanwhile, below the bridge, Vince and I found more graffiti, evil symbols lining the bridge's cement foundation, and a natural fire pit containing charcoal, ash, and small animal bones. There was something unsettling, but not alarming, since we assumed it was the work of young high school wannabe devil worshippers in training. After a few minutes, we figured we had examined all worthwhile areas underneath the bridge and decided to climb back up to the bridge surface. The other group remained, looking around on the bridge, and we continued looking around the edges of the bridge. Minutes later, the chatter stopped, followed by silence, as both groups on the bridge, Vince and I and the other group, likely see the same thing. The headlights of what appeared to be a large pickup truck, barreling down the main country road, headed east. This caught everyone's attention, as it was about 12:30 a.m. or 1 a.m., and no cars had passed the entire time we had been there, with the exception of the other group on the bridge, that is. The truck slowed as it approached the bridge access road intersection. Vince and I debated nervously about what the driver of the truck had in mind. Are they just on their way home? Have they seen our flashlights and are coming to yell at us to leave? Are we in potential danger? We whisper-yelled at one another about what to do before we came into view of the truck's headlights. We could hear the other group also whispering to one another about what to do next. After turning onto the bridge road, the truck gained speed. We were all petrified by ideas about what was to befall us. Being petrified, nobody from either group thought quickly enough to dart out of sight, into the Boonie, or past the bridge to our cars. My heart began racing, and I began to feel adrenaline rush through my head and limbs. The truck came to a halt, dead center on the bridge, with a few from the other group, as well as Vince and I, directly in view. By now, my heart was practically beating out of my chest, and I was struggling to control my body shaking. Although goofy and expressive with my friends, I was a shy kid when it came to interacting with strangers. I subconsciously knew Vince would be taking the lead in this situation. Vince and I shared friends and interests. However, his personality is completely different from mine. He is quite extroverted, openly opinionated, and confidently a tough dude. He was small, but carried a bit of weight, and had a volatile attitude, particularly with authority. He wore a flat cap, a torn and studded jean jacket, and knee-high socks. Sometimes he'd also wear a kilt, just to elicit a response from strangers. Your typical high school punk and ska scene apprentice. Vince was clearly not fazed by the events whatsoever. Without blinking, as soon as the truck parked on the bridge, Vince began walking over to the truck confidently, as if he knew the driver. After Vince talked to the driver from the passenger side of a large, silver F-150 for about a minute, I approached and stood to Vince's side to gain a sense of what he and the driver were discussing. I saw a man in the driver's seat, around late 30s to mid-40s, with short, well-kept silverish hair and blue eyes. I began listening to the conversation when the driver went into a diatribe about how we were not allowed to be on the bridge and how he was going to call the cops if we did not leave. Vince argued with the man, stating the bridge and road were public property and that we had the right to be there if we wanted. I, of course, began pestering Vince while the driver was still facing us. Knowing an escalation was not worth the potential consequences, I argued with Vince, trying to convince him that we should just go. At that point, I knew logically, staying there would only translate to bad times, my friends. Vince continued arguing with the driver, and I began walking towards where our car was parked. As I was walking towards where the car was parked, I kept yelling for Vince to leave the driver and to get into the car so we could leave. The other group, at this point, heeded the crazed driver's warning. They all gathered, got into their car, and drove off into the night towards the other end of the road, without speaking to the driver at all. Now Vince was not budging from his spot, and I began walking back to him, in efforts to collect him and then leave. As I was walking back to Vince, the driver suddenly cut off the argument mid-sentence and said, "Maybe the police aren't necessary," in a threatening tone, as if to imply he'd take care of the situation himself. He then proceeded to stare at both of us with dead, emotionless eyes, taking the time to stare deeply into both our pairs of eyes. He said nothing for about a minute, continuing to stare at us both, with Vince beginning to ramble about how we were going to stay put. Suddenly, the truck abruptly accelerated and sped away towards the other side of the road, which also dead ends into a major country road. My instincts were telling me to leave immediately, but I did not manage to convince Vince, as he was consumed with being correct about the situation. He was adamant about the bridge and road being public property. He went on about why we should just stay to prove a point. This is why pride is referenced as being a downfall of human behavior throughout the millennia, where in excess it leads to failure or tragedy. I wanted to leave, but Vince had driven and I needed him in order to get home. I should have left and called for a ride at this point, but I was also concerned for Vince's well-being after his prideful short-sightedness regarding the potential consequences of remaining at the location. So we remained at the bridge for about 5 to 10 more minutes, arguing about whether or not to stay. Finally, Vince became bored with the situation, and we began to pack up. While packing up, the house key on Vince's key ring became loose and dropped somewhere within the direct vicinity of the bridge. We looked around for the key for a while, to no avail. We packed up the gear, as Vince struggled with leaving the house key. As we were ready to give up looking, resolving that we'd return the following day and search during daylight, we both see the headlights of a pickup truck barreling down the main country road that we used to access the bridge, heading east towards the bridge access road. I was terrified. We were fairly isolated, and could tell the driver likely had been calling a bluff regarding police involvement, since he decided to return without first sending patrol to the location. We quickly jumped to the side of the bridge, on the end closer to the main country road from which we entered. The truck sped past us and the bridge. The truck then cut its lights suddenly and stopped completely. We could not judge the distance, as it was almost pitch black and fog had begun rolling in. Needless to say, visibility was poor. Vince and I both heard some rustling and movement up ahead. Then we heard a door on the truck slam shut. Vince and I listened silently, internally trying to figure out what to do next. This obviously crazed man was now parked past the bridge, next to where our car was parked, and we did not want to risk his direct path in order to run for the car. There was silence, for what felt like an eternity, but in reality was something like 4 or 5 minutes. And this silence was cut by the deafening blast of a shotgun in relatively close range. We could not see the driver and could not identify from where the driver was shooting. However, we heard what seemed like 6 large blasts fired in complete darkness at relatively close range, and then heard the sound of glass shattering and falling to the ground. Vince and I had hit the ground by this point, covering our heads and ears, as we could not see the gunshots or crazed individual ahead, praying we weren't about to be hit. The shotgun blast, then stopped, followed by utter silence and crickets chirping. We remained in position, laying face down on the field, while looking to one another and gesturing with our eyes whether it was safe to get up. We then heard another truck door slam. Within a few minutes, the truck engine ignited, and the crazed driver sped off towards the other side of the road. Vince and I gave it a few minutes before rising to survey the scene, just in case the crazed driver decided to quickly return and catch us off guard. We slowly approached Vince's car, looking around before hopping in. We were still unable to see very well with pitch darkness, and our gear was already packed in the car. It wasn't until we started the car and began moving that I felt shattered shards of glass coating the entire passenger seat. I looked back to the rest of the car and observed that this crazed driver shattered every single window in Vince's car. As soon as we realized the condition of the car, we sped down the main country road from which we originally accessed the bridge road. After we felt comfortable enough, with a good amount of distance between us and the bridge road, we pulled off into a newer housing development. We called the police and informed them about what had transpired. Vince and I were still shaken by the incident and continued talking about it frantically until the police arrived. We provided our statement and all the pertinent details. Unsurprisingly, especially for the socially conservative town in which I was raised, the officers gave us absolute lip service. They claimed they might have an idea of who could be involved and would go talk to this individual, who lived on one of the roads located near the bridge. The officers continued their lip service that without more concrete evidence like a license plate number, there would not be much they could do, even with the provided car and physical description. More likely than not, they knew exactly who was involved, and considering we were teenagers out loitering on an isolated country bridge in the middle of the night, they did not want to take any action against this individual. And this was very likely not the first time they had been involved in an incident related to this individual on the bridge. They advised that although the road and bridge are public property, it was not a good idea for us to be wandering around the isolated bridge in the middle of the night, and that we should use better judgment. Call me crazy, but if an individual fires a shotgun multiple times at unarmed teenagers on public property, this should warrant a much more serious examination than simply writing the situation off. This incident might indicate the lengths that crazy driver was willing to go to escalate the situation. Had one of us been hit by the fire, the situation would have concluded much differently. Vince eventually had all his car windows replaced and the shattered glass removed. We've never gone back to that bridge on foot, and have a feeling we never will again. Occasionally, when I'm in town on a country cruise by myself or my friends, I'll drive past it, or on a rare occasion, drive over the bridge. However, I will never slow down near the bridge, and sure as hell will never get out onto that bridge at night again. Had I been older and slightly wiser, I certainly would not have allowed the police officers to end the complaint there. I have close family members who are attorneys, and would have definitely consulted them for follow-up on the incident. And at the time, I was shaken by the situation, grateful to be unharmed, and did not want to inform my parents, as this would cause significant worry and unneeded lecturing. Given what the officer explained at the time, as a young'un, I also assumed what they told me was 100% the truth. I was taught to respect and always cooperate with law enforcement. I lacked the critical thinking I now have regarding civil liberties and enforcement code, as so many stories on this sub do. Let this serve as a lesson to use common sense and trust your instinct. Do not allow yourself to be pressured by anyone, including friends, into an unnecessarily dangerous situation. If your instincts are telling you to leave, do whatever you need in order to remove yourself from the situation. And to the cowardly douchebag who fired shotgun rounds at unarmed teens in pitch blackness on public property, you better pray we never find out who you are. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. Before going into my normal spiel, I once again want to thank everybody for the donations to Jerry's GoFundMe campaign. I also want to thank everyone who has shared the link on social media. We're up to $580 of the $1,500 goal, and Jerry and I thank everyone involved. I am once again including the link in the description for this video as well. And speaking of this video, if you liked it, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please consider hitting the subscribe button below, or using the icon of Ichigo that will appear at the end of this video. Feel free to leave a comment and share the video with someone you think might enjoy it. You can always follow Ichigo and myself on Facebook and Twitter. If you have a story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. And as always, please don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.